I tell people that, bull riding was really, then some don't believe it, but it was good training to be a professional artist. It makes you mentally and physically tough for one thing. The second thing it does, I tell people you need three things to be a good artist, and you need the same three things to be a good bull rider. And you need to have confidence, faith, and ignorance. And people go, oh, the ignorance kind of throws them. And they say, why do you say ignorance? I says, because you got to believe that you can do it even though everything's stacked against you. Like you get on this big old 1,800-pound bull and you think like, he ain't going to step on me and hurt me. I'm just going to ride him, and if you start thinking that way, you're going to get hurt. If you start thinking like, oh, these, you go in there with some fear, you're going to get hurt. So
Yeah,
I think, it
absolutely.
made me, I try to live my life with as little fear as possible in it. And I think that was a great training. So like, I haven't been afraid to step out there and do things like that. And so like I was sculpting for almost 7 years before I decided to do it full time. And me and my wife got married in 1980. That was the same year I cast my first sculpture. So she's kind of seen the career go from nothing to something. And then I was working in the oil field. I was a field superintendent at the time. I was making pretty good living. I had an office and a secretary and a truck and a steady paycheck. And then it was March 13th, 1986. I went in there and I quit that job. And my little boy was 10 months old and my wife was pregnant with our daughter. And nobody thought it was a good decision. Nobody said, hey, my mom said, son, that's pretty risky. Which is, you never been afraid of risk. So, I went out there. I didn't have a plan B a whole lot. I had a thrift plan at work and I'd saved about $25,000. And that was my seed money to get me started. I told my wife, I says, if I can't make a living in a year at this, I'll go back and work in the oil rigs. But I think I can make this go. And, it seems like when sales started getting low or something would come along, a commission or a big sale would come along. And I started getting in more galleries. And when I first started marketing, so this is back in 1986 when I became a full-time artist, the internet still wasn't around. So with galleries was kind of the way that I figured to go. And I said, well, the only people that buy art have discretionary income. So I'm going to go to places that have wealthy people living at them. And that's kind of my basic philosophy. It wasn't that deep. I went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I got in a gallery there. I also went to Aspen, Colorado. I was in a gallery in Park City. I like to ski, so I started working in it. I was in Vail and Breckenridge. And they were places I could drive to in a day from Wyoming. And I started marketing all my artwork there and they started selling. And that was kind of the thing that got me going. And I was fortunate that I was able to kind of keep things rolling where I never got completely busted out, where I had to go back and get another job. So I've always just believed that, I can do this, and sometimes you work a lot of hours at it. And, I figured whatever I lacked in talent, I'd make up with hard work. And I don't really have an academic background in art. I tell people I have a PhD in art though, because I was poor, I was hungry, and I was determined. That's my PhD.
Oh, wow.
And I've still been blessed with it, and then, after about 7 years, I started taking my first workshops. There's a Scottsdale's artist workshops down in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I think I took my first workshop from Jerry Balsier, a great sculptor. And my learning curve went so fast in that 1 week. I said, wow. So in the next 3 years, I did 12 workshops with different artists, Richard McDonald, Glenna Goodacre, Ed Fraughton. I studied with some real masters of the bronze sculptors. And I tell you what, if you want to be a bronze artist, that's the quickest way, I think, to learn it. It's not through books and trial and error. And even though that's how I started, because I didn't know any better, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And now that I've taught like 6 workshops, and they take a lot out of you. When I teach a workshop, it's I'm tired for the next week for 2 after, because I put a lot into it, and I try to give those students everything I've got, because that's what the people before me were giving me, everything they got. So,
Yeah.
and I like to use live models whenever I do workshops. I did one up in Kalispell, Montana. It was called Lion, Tigers, and Bears, and we actually had a grizzly bear, a live grizzly bear, live tiger. And so he had like half a dozen mountain lions up there too. Plus he had wolves and otters. It was a game farm up in Kalispell, Montana. See, in Wyoming, you're not allowed to have game farms. So Montana and Colorado, those places can have game farms, but Wyoming can't. So, but I thought there's nothing better. And it was so fun to sculpt grizzly bears from life, because it's not something you get to do every day. That's probably one of my most fun workshops. And then, a lot of the other workshops I'd bring my own horses. and we use horses for models, and I still use them for models. I mean, I ride them all the time too. I rope on them, so I get double dip on them. So, and that's one thing, you know, I think the two hardest things to sculpt as a representational artist, number one is a human figure, and number two is horses. And I think those two are the most difficult to actually get the realistic, you know, the realism coming through on them, where if you get anything off proportionally, people just notice it, you know, at least I do. And that's why, you know, whenever I sculpt or do any proportions, I work out my proportions by head size. So like when I'm sculpting a horse, I usually, you know, an average horse head is about 26 inches and an average man's head is about 9 inches. So I'm going to do a 1/6 scale. I scale everything off of that. And I usually use the metric system so much better than standard. So to make something look realistic, you got to get the proportions right. If you get the head too big or the legs too short or the body too thin, you know, and I think I try to elongate things a little bit because it's more attractive, you know, than making things short and squatty. So, you know, I take some artistic license, you know, and then, you know, when you do these big monuments, you just put all that aside and you start just sculpting away on it. In fact, the most fun thing I've ever sculpted in my whole career, I did a life-size T-Rex, and I was sculpting on the head. And I had the head where I could bring it off with a crane, you know, so I could set it lower so I could stand around and walk around it. But the head was huge. It was 5 feet long, you know, and I started just free forming on it. I was like, I really don't, I've never seen a T-Rex, and there's not any good reference material on T-Rexes, you know? So, I mean, I had a skull replica that was cast, and I kind of used that for the teeth measurements and everything else. Then I put all that stuff aside and I just started sculpting it. And it was so fun. Just like, I was just making it out of my mind mostly, which is the most fun way to sculpt, in my opinion. I hate sitting there and looking at reference material, and I just like to let it flow if I can. That's why I like doing these quick draws that I've been doing for the last 38 years. I used to do 2 quick draws a year. I still do the one at the Buffalo Bill Art Show and the Jackson Hole Arts Festival. They're a week apart. So you got to do a sculpture in 90 minutes from start to finish. And then I'll cast them in bronze, but they'll auction them off. And then how many people, you know, you can sell them to but you know, it's getting in that flow state. And that's, I'm a big believer in the mental aspects of life, you know, where you can like not overthink things too much and just kind of let them flow out of you. And that's the funnest way to make art or do anything, really. Because once you get going on it, it's that 90 minutes goes by like, it's like 15 minutes, that's an hour and a half has gone by. And you get so zoned in and so in tune to what you're doing. And that's one of the things I like about, that's one of the things that attracted me about bull riding, you know, it's just, you went into instant flow state every time you climbed on a bull and nodded your head. It was just like, bam, your whole senses, your hearings would go away, and you'd just be so focused on what you're doing. And I find that doing these quick draws, it's a similar experience, except it lasts a lot longer. But I've read every book I can on flow, you know, there's quite a few books out there on it. And I still compete in team roping, and I try to use that. And I've been competing in pickleball too. And you get in those flow states doing that, you know, and that's, I don't know, for me, it's kind of an addictive thing. And anytime I get in flow, it's a good thing.